Welcome everybody to our 2022 North of Falcon joint Willapa Bay and Grace Harbor forecast meeting. I'm just going to wait a minute or two here till we reach a critical mass, and then we'll get started. Looks like we're still creeping up here a little bit, so I'll start the presentation at 6:03. Okay, welcome everybody. We're really happy to have you join us here tonight again for the 2022 North of Falcon joint Willapa Bay and Grace Harbor forecast meeting. This meeting will be held from 6 to 8 p.m. And it is specifically to go over Willapa Bay and Grace Harbor forecasts. My name is Marlene Wagner and I am the South Coast Policy Lead for WDFW. Next slide, please. So this is just a little overview of what this meeting will cover. I'm going to start with some staff introductions and the purpose of our meeting. And then I'll go through the North of Falcon process briefly. I'll also review the Administrative Procedure Act. And then I'll pass the mic over to our region biologist to go over our forecasts and management objectives for Willapa Bay, Grace Harbor, and Queetson-Quinault rivers. Next slide, please. So yeah, here's our sort of tree of staff involved here. Over on the left, in the statewide salmon management team, we have Kyle Addix, who is our intergovernmental salmon manager, Mark Baltzell, who's the state salmon and steelhead manager, and myself, Marlene Wagner, the South Coast fishery policy lead. On the right-hand side, we've got the regional team, with James Losey heading up the program, Region 6 Fish Program Manager. We have Mike Sharp, who is the Grace Harbor District Biologist, and then Kurt Holt and Kim Figler-Barnes over in Grace Harbor, who are the area bios. We also have Robert Allen, who is the Region 6 Hatchery Reform and Operations Manager. Over on the Willapa Bay side, we have Jody Pope, Willapa Bay District Biologist, and area biologist Barb McClellan and Lyle Jennings. And these folks are all here on our panel tonight to answer questions for you. Next slide, please. Yeah, so again, tonight we're just going to introduce the 2022 North of Falcon process, provide information for public input, answer questions about the information and the data, and receive initial public suggestions for 2022 fisheries. Next slide, please. I'll start here now by reviewing the North of Falcon process. Next slide. So North of Falcon is the annual cooperative process to set salmon seasons in Washington waters. The name refers to all waters north of Oregon's Cape Falcon, which marks the southern border of Washington's management of salmon stocks. And it's just one component of the larger salmon setting process that also involves state, tribal governments, federal regulators, other United States, and also Canada. Next slide. So basically the process is that we forecast the abundance of each stock, determine if there is a harvestable opportunity there, And then the next two bullet points are sort of an ongoing process where we model fisheries to determine which stocks are the constraints, predict what we will catch, and sort of rinse and repeat. And after that, we negotiate the sharing of catch with co-managers and other states. Next slide. So these next couple of slides detail the 2022 North of Falcon public meetings that are likely of interest to this group. All meetings this year will be hybrid or virtual. The links are clickable in this presentation, and it is posted on our website, and it was also circulated today to Willapa Bay and Grace Harbor email distribution lists. And so our schedule begins with this evening. We are currently in the joint Grace Harbor and Willapa Bay kickoff forecast meeting. Tomorrow on March 4th, we have the statewide salmon forecast meeting from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. There will be a lot of detailed information about ocean conditions here. So definitely plug into that if that is of interest to you. We will also present Puget Sound, Coastal Washington, and Columbia River salmon forecasts and fishery management objectives. And this will also be live streamed on TVW. Next on the agenda is the first of this year's Pacific Fishery Management Council meetings from March 8th to the 14th. Next is the first North of Falcon meeting on March 16th. There will be discussion of management objectives and preliminary fishery proposals for sport and commercial fisheries in coastal Washington and Puget Sound, and also some discussion of Columbia River and ocean fisheries. After that, we have a North of Falcon Grace Harbor fishery discussion meeting. That's on March 21st. And there we will have more detailed information about what fisheries might look like with our ocean options in order to begin narrowing down on our terminal options. On March 22nd, there is a Pacific Fishery Management Council Ocean Management Public Hearing where ocean options are discussed. Next slide, please. After that, we have a North of Falcon Willapa Bay fisheries discussion meeting on March 24th. We'll have a more detailed discussion about what fisheries are shaping up to be with our ocean options and begin narrowing in on our terminal options. Next on March 30th is North of Falcon number 2, and this is focused on developing fisheries further and narrowing down on what Washington state fisheries may look like. And we follow that up with more regional meetings for both Willapa Bay on April 5th and Grace Harbor on April 6th. Everything kind of culminates here at the second Pacific Fishery Management Council meeting. Here the council narrows down our ocean options and we get a proposed fishery package and start to move through the formal rulemaking or Administrative Procedure Act process. So a link to the schedule and all the individual meetings is posted here on this schedule page at the bottom. Next slide, please. So as we close in on fishing seasons and regulations for the upcoming year, we also go through this formal rulemaking process called the Administrative Procedure Act. The process this year actually started back in January when we filed a CR 101, which is a code revisor form for the public that we are about to start the rulemaking. The specific coastal commercial and Willapa Bay and Grace Harbor recreational CR 101s were filed on January 18th. After that process is done, it's relatively straightforward. After a minimum of 45 days, we can file a CR 102, which is the actual proposed rules that we are considering adopting. At this point, after a minimum of 35 days, we have a public hearing and accept written comments on the proposed rules. We consider making modifications to the proposed rules based on comments received or any errors identified in the proposed rules. And then we move to a CR 103P and concise explanatory statement filing. And the CR 103P will be the actual rules that are being adopted, and the director will review and consider adopting these rules. And then it is published to the Washington State Register after 14 days. And the rule becomes effective 31 days after the filing of that CR 103P. Next slide, please. So between the CR 101 filing in January and the later filing of the CR 102, we have this very large public process, which is the North of Falcon process. And this is where we have this long string of meetings that I just discussed, and where we take the majority of the public input. And as we move towards filing regulations in the 102, we'll have already gone through all this public process. And so the rules are as close to final as they can be, although we will still take additional comment and have a public meeting to consider changes to those. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to hand the microphone off to our regional biologists, Jody Pope and Mike Sharp, and we're going to start with Jody.
Thank you, Marlene. Good evening, everyone. I'm Jody Pope. I'm the district fish biologist for Willapa Bay. I'm going to first walk you through this table here to help you better understand and follow, as you'll see similar tables throughout this entire presentation. So this table here is a table of forecasted adults to return back to Willapa Bay. On the top of the table, you'll notice natural, hatchery, and total. And looking down on your left, you'll see that what species are being forecasted. And then for Willapa Bay, these are the 3 species that we forecast: Chinook, Coho, and Chum. On the bottom of this slide, you will see our escapement goals that are listed. Most of these are pretty straightforward, but just a reminder for folks that for Coho, we have a WDFW goal for natural origin fish of 13,600 and a PFMC goal of 17,200, and that's for naturally spawning fish. So it's important to make that distinction there. So as I mentioned, in Willapa Bay, we forecast for 3 main species: Chinook, Coho, and Chum. For Chinook, we have forecasted 3,071 natural spawning fish and 30,071 hatchery origin adults to return to the bay. It's important that I remind folks that even before fisheries take place for Chinook, we are below the forecasted goal of 4,350 natural fish. Before we move into the forecasted numbers of Coho, I want to take a minute and help you understand here that the values that are listed are, you can see underneath Coho, it says Ocean Age 3 forecasts. And these are forecasted abundances of adults in the ocean before the North of Falcon process starts and the fishery management processes begin. So these are not fish that will return terminally. So it's important that you know that this number is going to change as we move throughout our planning season until the very end, as Marlene indicated in the schedule there. So that, with that being said, we have forecasted 35,776 natural origin, 74,707 hatchery origin, for a total of 110,483 adults. And for Chum, we have a total of 47,806 forecasted adults to return to Willapa Bay. Next slide, please. On this slide, excuse me, I will share some recent trends of run size from about 2010 to 2021 as they related to our forecasts on the last page. And again, similar to the first slide, there's a lot of information for you to understand here. So I'm going to take a quick second to help you understand that, as again, you'll see these throughout the full presentation. So I want to give folks a chance to understand what you're seeing as we move throughout. So each graph you see here has a very similar orientation, where the horizontal axis in each graph is the year, 2010 to 2022. And the vertical axis in each graph is the run size. So each graph here represents a different species by color. And within each graph, the darker color indicates natural origin fish, and the lighter color indicates hatchery. So if we take a look at the first graph, the green graph, this is representing the run size over a year for Chinook, we can see that the natural origin fish remain stable over time, whereas the hatchery fish, they're a bit more variable. If we take a look at the Coho graph, we see trends that are variable over time, and both hatchery and natural stocks seem to be tracking and trending similarly over time. across time. Most recent trends, if you take a look at this graph, suggest that we're seeing an increase in abundance for both the natural and hatchery fish. It's also important that we mention that we did meet our escapement goal this last year, and given that we haven't in the last several years, this is great for us in Willapa Bay. Lastly, looking at Willapa Bay chum, I wanted to remind folks that this is a species that we manage in the aggregate, which means we manage for both hatchery and wild fish together. And in this graph, there is a hatchery component. You just can't quite see it because the run size is typically a lot less than the natural component. So it's just the scale that's being used in this particular graph. This run has been variable over times, as you can see a few peaks and valleys here, but most importantly, we've consistently been above goal in the most recent years. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Mike.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Mike Scharf. I'm the fisheries biologist that covers Grays Harbor, Queets, and the Quinault basins, and I'll cover those areas and forecasts for you this evening. Want to reiterate the forecast abundances that are produced for chum and Chinook. They're primarily a terminal abundance, whereas Coho, that's an ocean-aged abundance forecast for the most part. And what I'm presenting here is my attempt to show a terminal forecasted abundance based on recent time ocean harvest rates that we've seen. So you may see different numbers for Coho, but what I'm trying to do here is just represent what might be coming across the bar. And then how does that compare to the past 12 years of returns to the basin? So with that said, spring Chinook, we have a forecast of 1,323, a little bit below the goal, which is 1,400. And I'll kind of cover a little bit more in detail as we move into the next slide that covers the trends. So we have for fall Chinook, and this is specifically to the Chehalis Basin, this particular screen here. So fall Chinook, we have 12,810 forecasted for the natural return, which is above the goal of 9,753. And then a hatchery forecast of 2,147. So for Coho, and again, this is an estimate of a terminal abundance. This number will change as we move through the North of Falcon PFMC process and will not be finalized until the final ocean package is selected towards the end of PFMC 2 meetings. So we're looking at about 107,442 wild Chehalis Basin origin fish coming across the bar, and 43,552 hatchery fish. So this also includes a few thousand fish that intermingle from South Bay tributaries and the Westport net pen program. So pretty good number there. Next slide, please. So again, similar graphs as Willapa Bay. We have in the blue spring Chinook. You'll notice that the trend has kind of been a downward trend, except for the last couple of years. We've seen an uptick in the number of our spring Chinook. And the natural forecast kind of reflects kind of that down period with a little bit of a positive uptick. But again, there's some variability in here, so we need to be cautious with this stock. The green is our fall Chinook. It's been pretty stable over the years in this time set. I will say that in 2021, our last return did not achieve the goal in Chehalis. The escapement was 8,176. So a little downtick this last year. For the orangish, reddish, tomato colored graph is our Coho. We're all aware that we've been in a downward trend for the last 6 years. But we have some positive numbers. First, I'll report that we had this issue last year where we didn't have an escapement estimate completed for current year. which we don't again this year because we're still seeing coho out spawning. And just for kind of a reference, up at Bingham Creek Trap, they passed 3 coho above the dam on Tuesday, which is indicating that there's still coho moving up into the spawning ground. So in 2020, when we wondered what the goal or the escapement was, it was only, we ended up with 20,000. I lost my number here. It was 20,000 and some odd fish. So we did not achieve the goal in 2020, but we're seeing that positive uptick, as Jody explained. And I have 4 or 5 different in-season models for coho that I use to kind of track in season what might be happening. And that includes trap data, counting reds on the spawning grounds, and fishery related data. And they all seem to point towards about a 54,000 escapement for 2021. So we're definitely seeing a kind of an improvement in our coho populations. Next slide, please. So on the hump tulip side, we've got a fall Chinook forecast of 5,099 for the natural and 6,484 for the hatchery program. The goal here is for natural production is 3,573, if I remember correctly. And then for coho, again, these are a terminal estimate of forecasted abundance. 4,392 for the natural origin fish and 29,310 hatchery origin fish. I want to take a quick note here to just point out that there was an increase in hatchery production for coho in both hump tulips and Bingham Creek hatcheries. These are increases from legislator monies for the killer whales, and this increase is going to hopefully stay around for the foreseeable future. So just wanted to get that out there. So for chum, we have a forecast of 32,720 and a hatchery forecast of 1,879. Next slide, please. So again, similar graphs that we've seen. And again, a reminder that the y-axis is different for each of these graphs. So hump tulips, the Y for fall Chinook, it's 20,000. For coho, it's 60,000. And for chum, it's like 70,000. So there's a little bit of difference. So you can't compare these graphs to each other, but the green is the fall Chinook, and been a fairly steady, consistent performing stock of fish, and we have a forecast that represents that. The tomatoey colored graph up there shows our coho, and again that low that we've seen since 2015 is there, but we've seen an uptick, particularly in the forecast of hatchery fish that was quite large, and in part due to an increase in production. And then Grays Harbor chum, again, a fairly consistent returning fish for the last 10 years. I think we've only missed the goal once. And we have a forecast that kind of represents the stability of that stock. Next. Again, I'm not going to cover all of the stocks within Queets in the Quinault. The coho seem to be the one that draws most people's attention. And again, as I've stressed too many times, that coho forecasts here are terminal forecasts, except for, and I've looked at this table all day long, and it didn't ever occur to me or even jump out, but the Queets hatchery forecast is actually an ocean aged 3 abundance, not a terminal forecasted abundance. So 22,214 is actually how many adults will be out in the ocean prior to the start of our fishing regimes. So Anyway, what this is showing is that our forecasts for our coho are pretty robust across the board. It's not just one or two stocks. We're seeing an ocean regime that is favorable, or at least it has been in the past favorable for coho survival. So next slide. And this is kind of what it looks like in comparison to what we've seen in the past. And again, these two graphs are not comparable in terms of its y-axis. So I kind of don't look at it that way, but Quinault River has been, you know, of course, all of them have been up and down, and we all see that 2014 peak that in every river system that we saw that peak. But again, it's showing a fairly robust forecast across the board. Next. That's the end of our presentation for forecasting. So kind of what does that mean as we move forward in time, and what are our management objectives? So for Willapa Bay, yeah, I think it was January or February 17th, the commission provided interim guidance for how we manage Chinook this year, and an impact cap impact rate cap of 20% is what the guidance was for both Willapa Bay and Nacelle Chinook. And then for Coho and Chum, our management objectives are to achieve the escapement goals as they stand. For Grays Harbor, for spring Chinook, the forecast was below the goal, and the stock has been up and down the last few years, and had a couple of years of really low abundance. So being very cautious with this stock is prudent. So no fishing is probably going to be the objective here. For our coho stocks, both hump tulips and chehalis, we have not achieved the escapement goal 3 out of the last 5 years. And our policy guidance is that we will cap WDFW at terminal fisheries to 5% or less. And for all the Chinook and Chum populations, our management objectives will be to meet the escapement goals that are set forth. And that's all. I guess next slide. And that leads us to kind of the conclusion of the forecasting, and I will pass the torch on.
Thanks, Mike and Jody. I think we're ready to go ahead and right on schedule, take some questions or comments from the public. So you can raise your hand in Zoom at the bottom of the screen.
And
if you'd
also,
like
so it looks like people are starting to raise their hands. Our first question is from John. John, I have enabled you to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I'm new to this process, and kind of what I'm wondering is I'm concerned about river fishing in Johns River, Elk River, that kind of thing. And I know last year we weren't allowed to keep any native fish. It was only hatchery fish, which don't come up those rivers. Is this the point in the process where I raise concerns about that? Or is this something that I wait until further down the line after you've done all this pre-planning?
Yeah, thanks for your question, John. I think that would probably be a good question to ask us at the next meeting. I don't know if Mike or Jody want to add to that.
I think this is a good time to always ask questions. But from this point forward, we're going to have a couple other meetings where all fishery suggestions will be listened to and jotted down so that we have a record of them.
Thank you, John. And our next question is from Stephen. Stephen, I have allowed you to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so basically my question is on the Chehalis Basin in river fishing. My question being, do you guys, it's kind of an odd question, but do you guys look at what the impacts are for sport fishing, catching and releasing wild fish, and how many we actually kill by doing that? And do you think it would be prudent for us to have, a limit of 1 or 2 fish, regardless of clipped or unclipped, and get us off the water versus looking for hatchery fish and impacting the wild stocks while we're doing that?
Thank you, Stephen. I'm going to hand your question over to Mike.
Certainly, and Stephen, yes, we do take into consideration handling mortalities that occur during all our fisheries, mark selective or not. And certainly we will evaluate the proportions of each origin of fish out there to determine whether or not it's beneficial for the fish to do a mark selective fisheries or not. And so to answer your question, yeah, all of those things are evaluated in our pre-season modeling processes.
Thank you, Stephen. Next, we have Marlisa. Marlisa, I've allowed you to unmute.
Can you
Yeah, we can hear you.
hear me? Thank you for taking my call. This is Marlisa Williams-Dugan, and I have been a part of this process for 15 years or so now. And as I look at the forecast numbers and the limited access the public has to make comment, I have growing concerns that fishers in freshwater continue to be reduced. And the other gentleman's question was right on. But what I want from Fish and Wildlife is, what are you doing out ahead of us in the bay and in the ocean to continue to allow recreational fishers in streams in Willapa and Grays Harbor to continue to have a meaningful fishery, instead of only allowing commercial opportunities to exist to the maximum, to harvest to the last fish, and yet to shut down fresh water? What are we doing? What are we going to do this year in 2022 to ensure that recreational fishers from land are going to continue to get a meaningful opportunity?
So I can take this one if you want, Marlene. Marlisa, thanks for that. As I sit from my chair as the statewide salmon manager, I think as we're looking across the state at opportunities, not just in Willapa, Grays Harbor, but out in the ocean, Columbia River, Puget Sound, we have some pretty we have commission guidance through the North of Falcon policy and the Willapa Bay policy that really guides what these opportunities are. I think we have some pretty I don't want to call it strict guidance, but we have guidance in the North of Falcon policy that really directs us to provide a suite of opportunities, thinking both of marine area and freshwater fisheries, and providing a diversity of opportunities on different species, trying to adhere to that guidance and maximizing that opportunity across the landscape. So those are all kind of the things that guide what we try to do each year. I guess I would ask, are there specific species fisheries that you're interested in that you're not getting opportunity on currently? That would help us to know, as you're providing comment here on exactly what river and species fisheries you're looking at getting more
Certainly.
or better opportunity on.
Certainly, I am an advocate, a freshwater fishing advocate, primarily for Willapa Bay. And I have watched the opportunities be reduced to nothing in the Nacelle and the Palix River, and the Willapa practically has very little to offer anymore either. The only decent river to fish in is the North Nema, and there's a lot of complications and rhetoric out there, and I, respect what you have to say as the company line, but what I see on the bank and what I see happening is not that the guidance that you're given is often not followed. I see that there's an asterisk for a 20% impact on Chinook in Willapa Bay this year, but there's an asterisk there that says it's interim guidance, which means just that. It's interim guidance. It's not policy, and you're not enforced to it. And it certainly wasn't last year. So, where do we go to ensure for the future that we continue to have recreational fishing from land, that people without a boat, that don't have money, that can get their feet on the ground and get to some little place where they can cast a pole in with their child, with their wife, to catch a salmon? There is been so much mismanagement by the department, I will just put it out at that, that where there once was opportunity, there isn't. And these things continue to dwindle. For example, let's just use the Palix River, which used to be a viable, vibrant wild coho run. And because of unrestricted commercial fishing out there, where I always heard they can't catch them all if they fish 7 days a week, referring to the hatchery surplus of coho in the past, that they completely wiped it out so much that there is no recreational coho opportunity at all in the Palix River. None. No one seems to care. There's no recreational opportunity in North River that I know of. I think we've closed that because there were special studies there. And now you have, removed the wild native coho from the North Nema that's fishable in the fall. And even though we have a fairly robust late run coho in the North Nema, long after the Chinook and the chum are done, we can't keep a single one of those. So I ask you to work with me to look at these individual streams in the Willapa, and let's see what we can do to maximize recreational opportunity and to make sure that we don't have an extra day or a day given to the commercial opportunity where they kill it and we have none. That's really important. I'd like to know who's in charge now. Chad's gone, Barb's still there. Who's going to work with me when there's literally no public comment? None. Honestly, guys, I've been silent for about 6 months to a year since COVID hit. I haven't been very active in this process. I will be active this year, and I would be happy to reach out to any of you new people and give you information that you need.
Thanks for that, Marlisa. I think, you see the team on the screen here. Marlene's the policy lead. I work with Marlene and the teams here in Willapa and Grace Harbor weekly, if not daily in some instances. I understand you're directed at Coho. We've had some pretty significant Coho declines in the recent past that we've had to pay attention to. And also, whether you agree with it or not, the current policy does prioritize Coho for commercial fisheries. So that's where we've been directing our opportunities, is to meet those policy goals. So for as far as recreational opportunities this year, I think we're going to have some available opportunities to offer the recreational fisheries, and we're committed to working with you and others in the Bay to craft those opportunities as we go forward. That's why we're here.
Okay, thank you very much, but I'm not particularly targeted at Coho. Chinook really is what is really the only meaningful opportunity that we have down there, and they come early, and there has been some maneuvering at the commission level by Commissioner McIsaac to allow early dip-ins and early opportunities with commercial, which literally kills all the early fish coming up into the river, and we're talking Chinook now. So early fish that might get into the Willapa, the Nema, and the Nacelle, where an angler can get their pole, you have the data, and you will look and see how many they were allowed to take last year and how many they actually harvested, and it's somewhere near triple what they were supposed to get and what they actually got with the extra days that they were given ahead of the policy guideline that asked them not to go in until after the 15th in parts of the bay and not until after Labor Day in the south end of the bay. So can we work with that this year and try to stick to our Willapa policy guidelines and keep the commercials out on a run that looks like it's already fairly low so that the recreational people can have an opportunity this year?
As I stated before, Marlisa, we're willing to work with you to craft the best available fishing opportunity in Willapa Bay this year. Thank you.
Great.
And next we have a caller with the last three digits 425. I have allowed you to unmute. Okay, I'm going to switch. Maybe you might need to get, oh, there you are. I see you unmuted.
There, muted.
We can hear you now.
Can you hear me? All right, so I have a question for the Grays Harbor forecasting. At the 12.8 thousand wild Chinook for the Chehalis Basin, spawning goal 9753, leaving 3,000 and change for harvestable surplus. Split 50-50 with our tribal co-managers, that's about 1,500 and change. I don't have an old model in front of me, but I just wanted to ask if someone could refresh what the Chehalis tribe share of the state share is. What part of that 1,500 are we expected to pass upriver into the Chehalis tribe's nets?
So if I may jump right in.
Thanks, Mike.
It is the proportion of wild Chinook that reach and spawn above the Chehalis tribal boundaries. And like you, I can't quite remember the exact number, but it's around 30-some%. So 30,
what was that
30-some percent of 1,500.
30%?
Yeah, somewhere in there. So it's based on the proportion of spawners that originate above basically Black River.
Okay.
And I can't remember without pulling it a file up real quick, but I think on average it's somewhere around 30% of the 30, maybe 35% of the spawning population originates upstream of there.
And can we expect a initial model run at the next meeting where you guys usually start, at least as a talking point, planting this year's forecast prosecuted with the same rules as last season and see what we've got left?
Yeah, certainly.
Can we expect that?
Yeah, it's my goal to get that thing up and running. I haven't initiated that. I wanted to get through this part first, but certainly that's our first step.
And next caller ends in 126. I have enabled you to unmute. Caller, last number 126. Okay, next. Oh, you're unmuted now.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yep, sorry about that. Hi, Patrick Gaffney here. Just had a couple comments and then I think I have two questions. First two comments is in regards to the hump tulips hatchery production for coho. I just wanted to point out to folks that didn't know that that's a angler participant brood stocking that we're doing there to help boost that run. Second comment would be, or I guess it's a question. I'm kind of confused as to last year we were stuck with a Mark Select fishery, but just looking back and looking at this graph, 2020 was our last year we could impact. It was a non-select fishery along with 2019. 2018 was a Mark Select fishery, but if you look at 2020 and 2019, that there's 5 years prior to that. So I'm just wondering why, with the increased numbers this year and last year, we were only allowed a Mark Select fishery, but not prior to that, and why we're continuing to have a Mark Select fishery in river. Even though previous years it looks like we were under escapement. I was just kind of curious why that happened.
Well, we propose Mark Selective fishery where it meets our management objectives. And in some years we have 5% objectives that we need to, and where we have a lot of hatchery fish, but not very many natural origin fish, particularly for coho and the hump tulips. Probably not going to see a fishery that doesn't include Mark Selective or coho. Certainly, this is the time, this meeting and all the other meetings coming up is when we would like to hear your suggestions on fisheries that you might like to see this fall. And our job is to model those to see how they meet within our management objectives. So yeah, if you've got some
I'm not suggesting a season. I'm just kind of curious as why 2020 we had 5 prior years of being under the mark for natural origin fish, but we were still allowed to target wild fish. It just kind of seems confusing to me that now we're on the uphill side of things and we're still in that box, even though we were under our escapement 3 out of 5 years prior to 2020. So that's just what I was kind of curious about. Oh, and my other question was, do you think, do we have a breakdown of late versus early fish, or is why we don't establish those in these graphs to show the difference between the two and those run numbers?
So coho are managed as either a hump tulips or a Chehalis origin stock. We do not break them out into late time to early time, although we have productions that are broke out that way, but we don't forecast them differently.
So even though we have early and late time hatchery fish, we don't forecast them as early and late time fish?
No, because we don't manage them differently. They're genetically very similar.
Okay, yep, that makes sense. Thank you.
And I just wanted to remind people that are on the phone, just in case there's been some forgetting, *6 is to toggle mute and unmute, and *9 is to raise and lower your hand. And it looks like our next caller is ending in 425. I've allowed you to unmute. You may need to dial *6. Okay. Next, we will go to caller ending in 126. Is that Patrick that just, I think that's Patrick who just spoke. Next, we have Travis. Travis, I've allowed you to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I've just got a question about the Chehalis River system. We have a lot of late timed hatchery coho that come up right around Thanksgiving. And this year, especially with everything else going on, with our steelhead stocks, and I know this gets into a whole bigger issue, we were shut down, I think it was December 1st for coho in the Chehalis. In the meantime, I was on the river fishing, and we had a really great late run of coho hatchery fish that we're not allowed to fish for because we get shut down early. Those fish are chrome bright and have sea lice all the way through the month of December. Beautiful fish, and we're not being able to harvest those. Is there anybody looking into a way that we can extend our late coho season, kind of while they're trying to protect the wild steelhead, but still allow us to fish for those hatchery fish? Because in the early part of the season, it seems like we run into a lot more unclipped fish. And then when we get a pretty good abundance of hatchery fish coming up, we're shut down due to trying to not hurt the wild steelhead populations. Is there anything being looked into that on how we can get our coho season to go into even December 15th? That's my main question. It sure seems like it was really great fishing right up until it closed. And I was getting fish on the last day that still had sea lice on them.
Thanks for your question. It was very good. I'm going to start by saying that the trend of the late time coho during the last several years has been pretty poor. However, this year it was a totally turned around. There were a lot of coho, and as I said earlier, we're still seeing coho coming up through the system. So the late time coho, for some reason, really started to show up in big numbers this year after several 3 to 4 years of kind of a really downward trend. And in fact, that they were trending worse than the normal time coho up until this year. So certainly we will continue to evaluate all of our fisheries and provide as much opportunity as we can while still meeting our management objectives for all our stocks. And that includes opportunities for these late time coho. It certainly is a valuable fishery to a lot of folks. So certainly we will keep that as one of our considerations as we move forward.
Okay, and I only had one other comment, I guess you could say, and that is kind of goes along with the comment that I already heard. And if there's a possibility this year with our forecast being up a little bit, to have it one fish either or 2 fish, one which may be wild, one hatchery, because we do have a lot of impact, or a lot of, we are on the river a lot trying to find that one hatchery fish. And it sure seems like it would, in my personal opinion, be beneficial to get our fish and get off the river. I mean, that's kind of where I'm at with it. And it's frustrating on days you go out and you fish all day and you could catch 20 coho in a day and not catch one hatchery fish, especially in the early season. And so I just kind of want to throw that comment out there that I'd really like to see us try to go back to that. I know in years past we've done a one fish either or 2 fish and one maybe wild. That's kind of what I'm hoping to see this year, and hopefully we can model something along those lines. Thank you guys for your time.
And our next person with their hand up, looks like his name is, oh, he just put his hand down. Next we have Garrett. Garrett, I've allowed you to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Well, thank you guys. I want to make some comment kind of along the line of the last guy. Up in the river early season, we have a lot of wild fish. And I mean, if it has to be a marked select fishery, which with our penalty box situation, it's looking like it will be. I really want to emphasize the importance of a later season on the upper watershed. I'd say, that section of river upstream of the Sats up all the way up towards Centralia area. Early season, it's pretty common for us to weed through, and I'm talking October, early November, to weed through 10 to 20 wild fish for every one hatchery. Whereas, later on, like from about Thanksgiving to Christmas, sometimes it's 50-50, or some days, there's a lot of hatchery fish around. So, I want to, if we're going to be mark select, I really want to prioritize that late fishery in the upper watershed. Thank you.
Thank you, Garrett. Next, we have caller ending in 932. I have allowed you to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
This is like the for Coho, and there's no comparison between the commercial party for Coho and Willapa to the and the early netting in August of Chinook in front of the freshwater and the Nema and the Nazelle really hurts the freshwater fishing. Lack of concern for recreational priority for Chinook would appear to be that that's going on Friday, right? Percent of the wild ones were fine, and we don't care.
I think this is Ross speaking. Is that correct?
Right.
Is that you, Mr. Markhurst? I think I'm not hearing the caller. Are other folks having the same issue?
Yes, I've had internet issues tonight, so I wasn't sure if it was just me, but yes, we're having issues hearing you. Maybe get into a different area with better service and raise your hand again, and we can call back on you. And I think we're gonna have to go on to the next caller. It looks like Carl. Carl, I have allowed you to unmute. Carl, it looks like you're unmuted. You may need to unmute on your end using *6. Okay, we will go to the next caller. Having some connectivity issues tonight, I think. Next is caller 126. I've allowed you to unmute.
I was just kind of curious, when we're under this 5% impact constraint, why do we allow the bay fishery to have non-selective fishery, but upriver? Is there just the fact that they catch less, or what? How do we figure that? Because we don't even know where those natural origin fish are going, but we're still allowing harvest on them. So I was just curious as to why it's not opposite. It kind of would make sense being opposite if we're going to do that.
So it sounds like my question again. The reason that sometimes we would do a one and done type of thing in the marine waters is that coho are more susceptible to hook and release mortalities when they are in marine waters. And as they move up into freshwater systems and become more mature, and they're more hardy in freshwater and can tolerate hook and release mortalities a little, or they can handle hook and releases a little bit better. So depending on the management objectives and our evaluations of impacts, we might provide that type of strategy, where in the marine waters, if you're releasing fish, you may be killing way more. So to quit babbling,
What is the mortality?
There is a difference in hooking mortality that we use freshwater versus marine waters.
What are those percentages? Do you know?
10% in the river and freshwater is 14% in estuary habitats.
You.
And next, it looks like we have Carl again. Carl, I have allowed you to unmute. May need to dial *6 if you're on a phone. Okay, and we have another Matt. Matt, I've allowed you to unmute.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Hey, thanks for everyone putting in all the time and effort and setting this up and just establishing the proper protocol for allowing everyone to speak. So thanks on that. I guess ultimately, and I usually always chime in on these meetings, but some of that kind of hit me after hearing some of these questions in regards to just our hatchery and even fishing opportunities. At what point in time are we going to start fighting for a larger budget? Because it seems like we're constantly in the deficit and not getting what we need. And if there's a correlation you guys believe to just not having the proper funding for not only WFDW or just anglers and opportunity. So, I mean, like, what are we doing to address a larger budget as a whole? So.
I can take this if you'd like, folks. So thanks for that question, Matt. I would say that our agency has a long history of kind of making do with what we have available and trying to maximize that to our best ability. I would like to acknowledge that this year in the supplemental session for the legislature, both the governor's proposal and the Senate and House legislative proposals have proposed funding quite a bit of money towards our agency for monitoring of both marine and freshwater fisheries and commercial fisheries, as well as hatchery monitoring and evaluation plans and infrastructure. So I think we're actually pretty excited about these opportunities that are getting put in front of us to get some extra boots on the ground, to collect some valuable data in places where we haven't been able to get to because we haven't had the resources. So I think we're all actually pretty excited about what's in front of us. Just let's take the Chehalis for an example. It's a huge system with a lot of river miles, and for us to kind of do a robust sampling and monitoring program for fisheries, that takes a lot of resources, a lot of manpower, biologist time to collect and analyze the data. So I think we're looking upon this as stuff that we can build on for the future. But I really appreciate your thought process there about just thinking about our needs when it comes to what we need to be better managers. So thanks for that.
Yeah, thanks for the answer. I appreciate that. But nothing really in regards to coming back to like our production wise as a state to provide opportunity in hatchery, right? Like obviously it costs a lot of money to raise these fish, right? I think what it was, this is like 10 years ago too, it was like $200 per fish or something. Maybe it's more now, maybe it's less, or maybe I'm wrong, but nothing in regards to saying, hey, how can we go there? And the final piece to that, you guys are talking about data and data and data. And I constantly hear from the guide industry, you guys are not, and I'm just gonna call you guys out, you guys are really not listening to the guides on their data. And that's it. So I appreciate you guys for the night, something to think about. And as you guys move forward, really go into the people that are on the rivers on a daily, yearly basis, not someone that shows up for 2 days. So appreciate it. Thanks a bunch.
Hey, if everybody's comfortable with it, I might jump in. Matt, I don't know if we've chatted before. I appreciate all your comments. They're really important. The one about listening to guides is one we're hearing a lot too, as you can imagine. I will say over the last few years, we've fostered some pretty incredible relationships with folks in the guide community. Some of those have lasted through really challenging times, others haven't, but we work on those. But the reason I spoke up was because I really want to flag this guide logbook that's now mandated. And this is likely to be the most important tool we use to communicate directly with the guides through data. So we have conversations with guides all the time, and a lot of great friends that are guides. But I think this guide logbook, once compliance picks up, is going to be a really important tool for us. So I just kind of want to say it out loud that in case folks are listening, that guide logbook is something we're watching and really hoping for. So thanks.
Yeah, and that's a good call. I mean, it's important. So any guides that are listening to this, do your part. Even if you are sour with everything going on, it'll help us out in the long run. So thanks again, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. And next, we have Andy Mitby. I have asked you to unmute.
You hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, just a couple quick comments, not even really questions. You have a few coho coming back to Grays Harbor for a commercial opportunity. With the 5%, it's going to be hard to get at those. So maybe something could be done with some interim guidance through the policy with our commissioners, or maybe just so we can do that within the state. And for Willapa, I think the early days in August are there to benefit when there's more hatchery fish around, so we don't use all our impacts at once. So opportunity after the 15th in the South Bay could be very beneficial to harvesting surplus hatchery fish if they are available. That's my comment.
It looks like that's all we have for right now. So I just want to remind people that you can use the raise hands. Oh, and now we have Dave Hamilton. Perfect. I have allowed you to talk.
Hello, you got me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Question for Mike. Off the top of your head, what is the, at Bingham, they clear the normals from the trap and the pond, and then they turn to lake. What is that date? It used to be December 1st. Is it still that way?
I defer to Rob Allen. That's a hatchery question.
Hey, Rob.
Right to unmute here. Hey, great question, Dave. You know, it seems like it's kind of shifted over time, but a lot of it comes down to experience, right? And if we tend to use a date rather than the morphology of the fish, a lot of times we're kind of leaning more towards that. You can see when those early, as you've seen over the years, you can see when those fish are all colored up on the early timed, and then you can just see this shift as soon as you get some fresh water. So to use just a date would probably be smarter, but we tend to go by the color of the fish. So.
Okay, because our gentleman earlier was talking about lates in November, and that is not lates. That is the old SATSUP native timing, okay? The front of the run, there's a lot of wild fish, and that's got to do with things that was done in the past that we all know. I ain't gonna try to go bag you guys here. But fact is, one time I think Stan Quinnell had January 1st as a date for lates. That was way back. So the thing about it is, gentlemen, it's in November, called them lates. That's just the normal timing for SATSUP coho, okay? As for the upper basin, the gentleman that said he had the questions about the hatchery fish, those are mitigation fish, and they were intentionally picked by the agency and the local community to be late timed. And that is why they will see their coho come back later. And like when you have a December shutdown for the steelhead and stuff, that really takes them out of the picture, because before it rains, it depends when it rains, okay? And so, but if you're just on a normal year, because I brood stocked that river and we had it choked off for Chinook, you will maybe get 5, 6 coho in a day or night come by. And when it rains, you'll get about 4,000 in a day. I mean, it's just that, but they're coming below Porter. So, you know, the guy about the upper basin thing with the steelhead thing, he's got a little bit of a good bitch. The other side of the coin, though, is in this whole picture, I do appreciate the spreadsheet that you sent, Mike, that showed the escapements that I sent out to about 400 people, and it's went all over the place. And most people listening here don't know is the Nowakam has been carrying this basin. Everything below the Sats at Fuller Hill has not been making escapement constantly. The Wishkal and the Wainuchi and the Hokiam are utter disasters. So I would like you to be prepared when we do the models. I'm going to hit you with the question, whatever seasons we propose, I'm going to want the projected escapement by trib, the best you can. It don't have to be, but I'm going to want something, because you're saying no already. Because that's kind of appalling when you look at the numbers and what aren't making escapement. And second, on people looking, saying we have to catch all the fish to catch a hatchery fish. When you're in a restricted fishery like we are at 5%, depending where you're trying to fish, you might as well figure you're in a catch and release fishery. And if you do get a hatchery fish, it's a bonus, because if it rains early, they're past you. If it rains late, they don't get to you. It's about where you're fishing, what the weather is, and what the fish are. Okay. And one last thing, if we have to limit ourselves, I'd rather see, I suggested it before, that we do similar to the ocean. In other words, if we have to lose like X number and it's like 2 weeks or 1 week, that we do it by losing a day every week for the season. That way, if it rains early, don't screw the upper basin and lower basin, because it's the way that it's the fish and Mother Nature. It's not you guys. And that gives a benefit to everybody. So don't run by the bottom guys or not get there for the top guys. It's just upper basin. It's just it strikes me as more equitable way to disperse the impacts around fairly from the local lower community and the upper community. And that's about it. You did say we made 2021 coho escapement, right?
We don't have a final yet, but all of my in-season projections are showing like it's going to probably be above 50,000.
So we did okay.
But yeah, and if I can address your comment about providing numbers for individual tributaries, because we do escapement estimates and cover as much of the basin as we can, we do have escapements for those, but we manage to a specific stock. And in this case, it's Chehalis coho, Chehalis steelhead. And so we don't manage to individual tributaries such as the Satsa. So numbers can be produced. It is how accurate those are pre-season would be a difficulty. But
well, I'm aware. I'm aware you managed to.
We can produce something.
Excuse me. I'm aware you managed to the aggregate. That's what everybody does. And so I'm just simply saying is, for a lot of people, we thought we were making escapement or this and that in different places. Okay, once that information was made available and it was spread out, I sent it out to everybody, and it's traveled far and wide. And by the way, there was deep appreciation for you providing that information. You have done it all the time with the models and the forecast. And I don't know if many people, I tell them to email you and say thanks, but I assume most people don't. But that your willingness to provide information timely, forward, and openly has been greatly appreciated. Okay, that doesn't necessarily happen with your employer everywhere. Okay, so but the day thing and equitable, I think, is very important. Okay, whatever way you choose needs to do it. But the thing that people need to understand is we are governed by the wild stock. Period. That's all there is to it. We're never going to miss hatchery escapement. And if we miss hatchery escapement, it's because something went wrong on a release or it just ain't there. Okay. And then the wild stock's going to be dead. And so we're toast everywhere. So when you're going fishing, people need to understand is if it's rained early, you better get your ass upstream because that's where the fish are going to be. I mean, you can be fishing down here and you won't find a hatchery fish at all because they move differently. They aren't going to be at the hatchery until November or so, but they'll go right by you in the Chehalis and up past the deadline and the Satsip, and then they'll park. They can wait a month and a half. And so people, the same where people saying, well, I had to catch 20 fish to get a hatchery fish. Depending where you are and when you are and what the weather's done, you might be lucky to find that one hatchery fish. You're in a catch and release fishery, and we are going to be in one this year. I think somebody said you hit it at 4.99 last year, setting our seasons, okay? And that was within the 5% guideline. Well, we're going to have more fish this year, but it's still 5%. And depending on how you do it and you do your best, there are going to be times you're flat into a catch and release fishery. And if you get a hatchery fish, it's going to be a bonus. Okay. And finally, I don't mean to rattle on, but this Lake Coho thing, I've been around that Satsip River since I was 13 years old, and I'm 74. The Lake Coho are in bad shape compared to what they used to be. Not just bad, really bad. They've gotten tangled up in the nation's steelhead fishery, which has a history, and which isn't really a steelhead fishery anymore. They're going after the Lake Coho, and that has an impact on especially the wild native. And I'm totally opposed to any fishing after December 1st, period, because we beat that salmon stock right into the ground. Okay, especially the January section of it. So all done ranting.
Had to find my unmute button. Okay, next we have a caller, last three digits is 932.
Yes, this is Ross. I'm going to try again. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you much better.
Fantastic. I wanted to just say that we understand in the Willapa there's a Coho commercial priority, but the recreational Chinook priority bears no resemblance to that Coho priority. And it doesn't show a sensitivity. I have to agree with the other lady. It doesn't show a sensitivity to freshwater recreational fishing for the Chinook priority. Most of the Nazelle was closed freshwater. In the Nema, the nets go in August, and if it was a concern for the recreational priority, more of a concern, they wouldn't be going in every Friday. Okay, the working stiffs can fish on the weekend. Well, you net right in front of the river the day before, and so there really does need to be more consideration for the only priority that we have, which is Chinook. And then I noticed in your statistics from last year, there was a period of time when the model said you were going to kill 3,000 wild coho, and you killed 6,000. And on the other hand, the Nazelle and the Nema are closed October 1st, are closed to chum, which we have plenty of, okay, because, gee, you might hurt one wild coho in the North Nema, for example. And I've fished it for many years. I average less than one coho a year when I'm chum fishing, okay? But you can't chum fish for the whole month of October because you might hurt one coho that you turn loose. And I can tell you it's less than one a year. And so the recreational priority for Chinook needs to resemble better a priority. You don't need to be netting on Fridays in front of these rivers. And you need to give us a shot recreational fishing at chum. I remember talking with Micah years ago. The wrecks catch about 100 keep a tag about 100 chum in the whole Willapa River, whole Willapa Basin. And so on the outside chance that you would kill one coho, okay, in October, it does not make sense to shut down all the fishing. And I would hope you would give that some consideration this year, especially with a better coho situation. But we really need to have that early Chinook priority be honored a little bit better, because it's all we have. Thank you very much.
Ross, I just wanted to comment and say thank you for your comment, and we'll take what you say into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
And next we have Greg. Greg, I have allowed you to unmute.
You got me?
Yeah.
Hey, I just want to agree with Andy on the Willapa stuff. The August fishery was pretty good. I think we need to try to get at some of those earlier fish that come up behind, that end up at the hatchery and really crowding out. There's no water. It's pretty hard for those fish to survive. So I think it's a good idea to get at some of those earlier fish, get them out of there. And I think that would be a good idea. And on the commercial side there. So really, really hope to get those days back. But also, there's been comments about the Nacelle River and parts that have been shut down. And I believe those parts that have been closed down were closed down for conservation. And that was supposed to be the number one priority of this whole policy, where we get our fish back to the hatchery. They got to have a place to go. They got to have a finish line. You can't just keep beating them on the head and expect to get fish back when you're just, they got to have a place to sit and just lay there until they go. It's just, there's, like I said, there's got to be a finish line somewhere. But so yeah, I'm glad we did that. But it'd be nice because we watch them sit and just die in these rivers. They're so low. There's no water. So probably getting some of that front end of the run would probably be better. Less impacts with wild stocks. It's mostly hatchery fish, but I was also really glad to see that the state is excited about the guides doing logbooks because, and I'm excited to see that because we've been doing logbooks for years. They just have WDFW on them, when they're on our boats. And I'm not against any guides or anything like that, but I think it is time for the state to recognize people that are on the water all the time. They're up in the rivers. They see what they see. We're down in the lower bay. We see what we see, and I hope the same, I guess I'm trying to say how to put it. I guess you would take our word for what we see as good as you would take their word. So, because the last few years, we've watched a lot of coho go by, and had been very vocal about it. And by the time a decision's made, the fish are gone, and then they're surplus in the hatchery is where they're at. That's the way the cohos are around here. They get some water and they go. So I'm really excited that the state's going to be looking for user groups input on stuff, to help manage the fishery. But also, yeah. So I just really want to see if we can get at some of these fish a little better. There's been a lot of stuff going by, and it'd be good to see. So I think that's about what I got for you. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment, Greg.
And next we have Stephen. Stephen, I have enabled you to unmute.
Yeah, so I spoke earlier. I spoke about the Chehalis and getting off the water and getting our fish and getting off the water. And I guess it's really comments more than questions. First comment would be, sounds like you guys are going to have a little bit more in the budget this year, which is great. We've advocated for you guys to have more money, be it through legislature or be it us having to pay more so you guys get more so you can affect our fisheries in a meaningful way. First thing I would say is I've guided in Alaska for 7 years, and I've guided on a number of tributaries that use sonar, and they count the fish as they're coming. They've got a live count of what's going on in the river. The days of you guys using paper fish have to end. Guys, we've got USGS stations all along the rivers. It doesn't make sense to me that we just don't have a fancy fish finder right there counting these fish as they go to get a better idea of what's actually coming up the river. A live count, a real count, guys. Something, that is far overdue. Second thing would be logbooks. I'm a fishing guide myself. This will be my 10th year guiding. I've been told in guide meetings by Larry Phillips, the old Region 6 manager, they're not going to be used for us to count fish. They're not going to be used for in-season management, stuff like that. It doesn't really make a guy want to go out and fill out his logbook if he knows that it's not going to actually affect the fishery. And I don't know if that's the actual truth. That's just what I've been told. And I know a number of guides would attest to that. Guys, we got to do a better job all the way around. We just see our fisheries getting closed out, more and more and more. And then it's expected of us to just go out there, fill out our logbooks, but we don't see any change. We don't see anybody listening to us. We're on the river every single day. We see 20 wild fish getting caught in a day to one hatchery fish. How many of those fish are dying after we release them? Well, I know that it's been, said that they're more hardy when they're in the river, and I won't disagree with that. But there's got to be a crazy mortality rate with catching and releasing wild fish. It's just got to be done better. I mean, even if it's just one fish, and I hear all this stuff about charter boats. I hear all this stuff about commercial fishing. Like, when are the sport fishermen ever going to get thrown a bone? How much money do the sport fishing industry bring to this state? I mean, literally, all those towns: Montesano, Elma, Aberdeen, Hoquiam, Hump Tulips. Their economies live and die with fishing now. Logging's not what it used to be. It literally, you guys, we're killing these small towns. I myself, just as one guide, bring a ton of money to those small areas. And I know that every single guide listening right now will attest to that. People buy fishing licenses because they're going fishing with me. You guys are getting money from these people that expect an opportunity. So something has to be done. We can't just keep looking at the ocean and then just saying the guys upriver just have to get the scraps or they get nothing. Something has to be done. And that's just me pouring out my heart to you guys. I love what I do for a living. I've had to change what I do for a living. I can't guide full time anymore. I don't get a steelhead season. All this stuff. We see these nets going in the water. I know you guys don't control that, but it's to the point where it's like, why does a guy even want to buy a guide tag anymore and pay you guys the money when there's no opportunity? I can't sell my trips. I can't, these people know, they're smart. They see what's going on, guys. And that's all I have to add to it. I just wanted to put it out there from a real guide perspective. So that's it. I appreciate your guys' time, and my heart goes out to you guys. I hope you guys can figure it out.
Hey, I just got a quick note as a response here, Steve. There's a lot to unpack there, but I just want to let you know, I appreciate you, like you said, pour your heart out there. A lot of passion, and I'm listening to it all. I know the rest of the team is. You referenced a good buddy of mine, Larry Phillips. So I feel like I have to comment on that. So my only comment there about the logbooks, I don't know what Larry said. He's not a man of few words, so I won't say that he didn't say what you said. But I do know that right now the guide logbook is not providing us much. And the number one reason for that is compliance. So it's the law. Guides are required to use the logbook. But Raquel Crozier, who's really led the conversation around the logbook, we're constantly bugging her like, hey, what can we learn? You know, and a lot of this is to be ambassadors for the guide community. And right now, it doesn't tell us much, whether we're trying to use it to understand the fisheries, understand, you know, where guides fish, who we can talk to. So it's really a compliance issue. So I think before we really talk about what the logbooks are good for, I think we got to start seeing people use them. So, so all that said, I really appreciate your comments, Steve. Let's keep in touch on this stuff.
Anything about sonars you guys have to add?
I do. I don't want to get too beyond the scope of this meeting, you know, focused on forecasting, but you made a good point about, you know, in-season catch estimates and improving estimates of abundance. So we've talked about the budget a bit, and one of the sort of large budget items is freshwater monitoring. We talk a lot about creel, but there's also other pieces of this, you know, weirs and adult traps. So these are trying to improve these in-season estimates of fish in and fish out. So all that said, you know, this sonar has become kind of a hashtag, like something we're getting pretty excited about talking about, but we need to explore sonar really to better understand the limitations here. So sonar is something we use across the state. We have a few rivers we use it, but I think in every one of those rivers, we depend on sonar for a post-season estimate of abundance. So that's a lot like a red survey. A few months down the road, we know what we saw in river. So that's really great for validating our red surveys or our trapping work right now. But if we want to have real-time estimates of abundance using sonar, there's a lot more work to do to understand that. So it's a tool in our toolkit, but I've noticed a lot of folks saying that's the wave of the future, and it might be. But before we just throw all our money at sonar, I think we pick a couple places, we become experts at it, and we understand the limitations. So be interested in talking more with you after the meeting too.
Just one more thing to add. So how does Alaska regulate their sockeye fishing around their sonars then? I mean, that's a day-to-day 24-hour sonar count that they literally have openers and closures around that sonar count. They're not going post-season and looking at that. It's legitimately, okay, we got, you know, 80,000 fish on one push of the tide. We're going to open it up for 6 hours. Then we're going to shut it down. Okay, we got another 80,000, you know, and then so on and so forth. Okay, we're at 20,000, shut it down. I mean, have you guys reached out to the state of Alaska and seen how they're having success counting their fisheries that way? And yeah, I guess that's all I have to add. I think that there's a lot of convoluted information around sonars, but when you actually look at what Alaska's done, it works for in-season management. And I think that it's just, no offense, buddy, it's just laziness on the side of WDFW. You guys just need to do a better job. Get the sonars in the river, count the fish, count the runs for actually what they are, rather than paper fish. We've got to know what we have before we can start to divvy out a fishery. And I just, you know, I just think technology's there, and it's just one of those things that if you guys have the money, buy the fish finders, put them on the USGS power, get them out there, same spots. And for steelhead and Grays Harbor, have one on every spawning tributary. If they're in that bad of shape, we need to put our money and know exactly what's going in the spawning tribs instead of just guys walking the river looking for reds. Let's get a real count of what's going on. That's all I have to add.
Hey, thanks. Maybe I'll get the last word in there. You know, to say no offense, you're lazy. It's tough to not take offense on that. So let's try to keep it positive and respectful here at this meeting. I do want to mention that in Region 6, the area I manage, my team uses sonar in both the Dungeness and the Elwha rivers. So we do use sonar. I'm familiar with what they do in Alaska. It's a little bit more complex than the way you described it, but it sounds like you do have a good understanding of it. So I really encourage you to reach out to me afterward, or I can reach out to you, and we keep this conversation alive. So thanks, appreciate it.
And our next caller is Marlisa. Marlisa, I have allowed you to talk.
Thank you for taking my call a second time. I was unaware that we had a lot of windfall money into the budget for WDFW, and I'm really excited about that for you. I would like to make a comment that would be hopeful that the money goes where it needs to go, and that it goes into hatchery infrastructure, personnel at hatchery levels, where we can actually grow these fish. And then we're not wasting this money in our budget with unnecessary surveys and monitoring in areas that actually doesn't extrapolate into growing our fish. I think this past gentleman who's asking for sonar counting, God bless the man. It sounds like he's thinking out of the box, trying to provide a tool in the toolbox that the department could and should use and should really look at. There are other tools that we can and should use, and let's try to use our money to do that. Let's keep our fish alive when they get back to rivers with low flow. This is a problem in the Nacelle River in particular, which the department looks like they're ramping up production down there when they're already having trouble keeping the fish alive that they've got, both with the fish in the hatchery before they release their smolts and with adults coming back to the hatchery with too warm a water in that river. So I would love to open up a conversation with some of the hatchery personnel and management about what we're going to do in 2022 as a, looking ahead to be proactive and not to be preventative and not reactive after something happens there. Can we get some money in this surplus budget directed at those issues that can wipe out a run and we could have nothing with Chinook?
Thank you, Marlisa. And that looks like our last hand for right now. And we have another one. Wade, I have allowed you to unmute.
Awesome. Hi. So I'm actually out of the area of Willapa Bay, but I've just done a lot of steelhead fishing and Chinook fishing. Recently, I've been doing a lot of reading concerning broodstock, and I was wondering, I'm not familiar, maybe there are broodstock programs in the Willapa Bay, but I was just wondering if there aren't, are there any current considerations for something like that? It seems to me with some of the research I've been doing that using wild fish for broodstock can actually improve the outcome for wild fish if they were just left to spawn naturally, and using hatchery to supplement that. So I was just wondering what the consideration is there, and if it's something the Department of Wildlife thinks could help Chinook and steelhead.
Hey Wade, maybe I'll take this one. Thanks for tuning in. And Rob Allen's on here too, and he's I would say an expert on this topic as well. So it'd be nice after this if we could chat more. It sounds like there's potentially things you've read that maybe we haven't bumped into, so that's great. I'll say the short answer is yes. We use integrated hatcheries, primarily in the Chehalis for steelhead, but then for a variety of species across the coast. Yeah, and I'm not going to think of a bunch of reasons here why that's just not a great option in many cases. So it's really just about kind of the pros and cons and balancing the risk. So for steelhead specifically in Willapa Bay, we don't use any integrated hatcheries, but we could. So I think we should talk more about it. So yeah, thanks for bringing it up. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
And the next hand we have is Carl. Carl, I have allowed you to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, amazing. My name's Carl Burke. I'm a contract lobbyist for the recreational fishing industry, and I would like to comment briefly on what Mark said about the money that the agency's getting earmarked this legislative session, which I'm quite sure is going to go through. You're going to get $3.8 million for monitoring, and specifically it plays out because you're mandated to, with that money, beginning in the fall, to implement all of the monitoring processes on those particular estuaries. So that's going to come real quick. So my question to staff is, are you making plans about how you're going to implement that? That's the first thing. And the second thing is, how is this potentially, as you go through this process, going to implement season setting process? Specifically, if you can do real-time monitoring of the fisheries and use in-season management to either open or close them based on what the monitoring tells you. You're going to get like 4 full-time boats, virtually unlimited resources for the monitoring. So I think it's a great one-time opportunity, potentially, to help you guys and help also sport fishers.
So Carl, maybe I'll try to respond to that. And James, if you have anything to add to what I say, please jump in. So there's a lot of different pieces in those packages. The boats that you specifically speak of are more geared towards the Puget Sound area, where we have those big mixed stock marine area fisheries. And we're really finding that you know, the amount of resources we have available on the water to monitor those has been pretty limited for the last 10 to 20 years. So we're looking to do that. Specifically on the freshwater pieces, I've been part of a team. We really started this effort last year in response to both just our own knowledge of where we've been kind of we've had less than adequate resources to address some of these fisheries questions that we're trying to answer. So last year we did an effort really focused more in North Sound, in the Skagit and Snohomish and Stillaguamish rivers on freshwater monitoring. So I'm part of a team right now that's working to evaluate what we did last year and looking at expanding that both on the coast for salmon and steelhead fisheries, as well as other streams in Western Washington. We're just wanting to make sure that we're really careful with how we implement this. I don't know that if we're looking at 2022 fisheries, that we're going to have all the pieces in place to be able to do the in-season management piece that you're talking about. I think it's going to take a couple years for us to put all these pieces in place to make sure that we have the right tools and the right information at the right times with the right fisheries. To be able to evaluate those as that information comes in and build that over time. I think over the long term, that's our intent with this monitoring, is that we have better information to make those, you know, decisions both in the preseason and in season as we get different information that comes in on the in-season part. So hopefully I answered your questions there, and James, if I missed anything there, I think we're really looking at a big, large, comprehensive program where we can really focus our energy on those systems where we have a lot of fishing effort and the ability to make change kind of on in season, and then be thoughtful about how we can spread that around to other systems that we don't maybe pay attention to as much, or don't have as heavy fishing pressure, where we can still collect and pay attention to those systems too.
Okay, and Marlene, that looks like the last hand.
Thank you, Leo. And thank you everybody for being here tonight.
So Leah, sorry, Marlene, I don't mean to cut you off. I guess I just wanted to mention one thing to folks, and one of my colleagues here in a chat message just brought it up, just to make sure that folks are paying attention. A lot of times in Willapa, what goes on in the ocean and Columbia River affects what we're thinking about in Willapa. Specifically this year, I think the Thule numbers in the Columbia are going to be a little tight, tighter than they were last year. So I think that's just something we wanted folks to be aware of. There was a question in the chat earlier about the control zone. We don't have an answer yet for this year about whether or not that'll be in play for fisheries planning. But it is a tool in our toolbox if we need to use it. So I just wanted to make folks aware of that and just know that as those initial model runs come into focus, we'll be sharing that information about what those ocean fisheries look like, what that means for fish coming back to Willapa and Grays Harbor. So just wanted to flag that. And again, sorry for interrupting, Marlene.
No, thank you. That was great. Thanks, Mark. And thank you everybody out there for joining us this evening. It was good conversation, good questions. We hope you'll turn in tomorrow at 9 a.m. for our statewide forecasts. And then we have more regional meetings at the end of the month. So we'll sure look forward to seeing you then. So everybody have a wonderful night. Bye-bye.
Thanks for being here. Thank you.